Well, that would have the least effect on the chairs that the chairs sit in and everybody else around the board table. Because he's already on the Fed, the president could nominate him to become chairman when Jay Powell's term is up in May. And he would have to go through confirmation as chair. But he's already been confirmed as governor. And he's already so therefore, most all of the paperwork that he would have to submit, it might have to be updated. But given the fact that he's a federal employee and on the payroll, he's probably not made a lot of complicated investments in the meantime, and he probably doesn't need to do divestiture and all those other things that nominees would have to do. So he could be confirmed fairly quickly and be able to take over when Powell's term ends. It's also possible he could be confirmed ahead of that time. And
is he a logical choice?
He's the most logical choice from the market's point of view.
Okay.
The other day I was having a chat with Mohamed El-Arian, and we were talking about who should be the favorite, and he said the person who moves the long end of the yield curve the least. And that would be Waller. And you saw after our Saleha Bosan's story on this that the yields at the long end came down today. And so the markets, I think, would be very reassured by having somebody who has been on both sides of the hawk and dove line, depending on the status of the economy. And that's the way he would look at it now.
So he's data dependent.
Well, yes, he's data dependent. But the thing that the White House is saying, White House officials are saying, is he was able to make plans for what he thinks should be done based on a forecast.
Okay.
He thought that inflation would be a one-time thing and that the economy was weakening, so he called for a July rate cut. And the others have been saying we need to see more data until we're certain we can do this. And apparently that caught the president's eye and people in the administration's eye, and they like that about him.
Mike, there's been so much going on. I'm sure people are struggling to keep up. Please remind us of who the other names that are being floated right now are. Well,
there's supposedly 4 candidates, but there are 3 names. So one is Waller, of course, and then you have the people that the president calls the Kevins. Kevin Hassett, who is the director of the National Economic Council, and Kevin Warsh, who is a former Fed governor who has moved into the hedge fund world and is also does some teaching out at Stanford. And so those 2 have been variously thought of as the favorites, and Waller was thought of as sort of the insurance policy. But now, if he is indeed the favorite, that will change the dynamic for the president, who can then look to put somebody in the seat that's being vacated tomorrow by Adriana Kugler, who doesn't have to be chair. And it also makes it much more likely that Jay Powell would resign from his board seat when his term as chair is up. If the president appointed somebody that Powell thought would be a bad chairman, then he might be inclined to stay on.
So this is what I think is interesting, right? I mean, Fed chair is obviously the Fed chair, right? And that's a super important position, but it's a Fed board, right? And there's a discussion. And so I'm just curious about how you are thinking about what the composition of this Fed board might be post a Jay Powell.
Well, you make the important point that there are 12 voters. There are 19 members of the Open Market Committee, which include the 7 Fed governors and 12 presidents of regional Fed banks. And for any particular meeting, 12 of them are voters. So you've got to convince a group of people to go in a certain direction. It's not just that the chair can decide what's going to happen. Now, that was certainly the dynamic under Alan Greenspan, but we've gotten way away from that now. It's much more consensus driven. So just changing the chair isn't going to make necessarily a difference, and changing it to Chris Waller wouldn't make a major difference, except that he has advocated at this point cutting interest rates. So the president can see him as more likely to do it. But I think any one of the 3 that they're talking about would advocate cutting rates when they got in. But also remember, we're talking about May of next year. And who knows what if they start cutting in September, they may have already cut a number of times, and it may be time to do something else. So it's kind of hard to say exactly what it's going to mean.
Well, we heard from Mary Daly, and she said that policymakers need to prevent further deterioration in the labor market. Of course, we know we got that weak jobs report last Friday and other economic data that people are still parsing here. But she said that if the labor market stumbles, it falls, and it falls quickly, and it falls hard. So you don't want to get into that situation. And she essentially was kind of saying that maybe we should kind of start thinking about some rate cuts heading forward. Is there more of a resounding sense of urgency right now to get a rate cut done this year, no matter who's put in as Fed chair?
I would quibble with the word urgency, but since the jobs report, everybody on the Fed who has spoken has basically embraced the idea that it is probably time to do that. We heard from Neil Kashkari yesterday. We heard from Mary Daly. We heard from
I love when the blackout period is over.
Susan Collins and Elise Cook. They all said the same thing, basically, is that it does look like inflation is going up a little, but not too much, but unemployment is starting to worry us.
I always think about, as Waller's name in this case is being talked out a lot as maybe the possible next Fed chair, how is that maybe impacting his relationship with Fed Chair Jay Powell? How are you thinking about
I think this will be one of the easier relationships to have because they've worked together now for 5 years and been, very cordial to each other. And Waller is seen as an intellectual heavyweight on the Fed. And it's not like he's going to get Powell fired. I mean, Powell's term is up, so he's going to leave. So I think the chair would be happy with this choice, especially compared to some of the others he could get.